And so let's begin by breaking down for you how we've seen an escalation in the West Asia conflict. Day 1 to day 7, here's how the war played out. It started off with, of course, Iran being struck with decapitation strikes by Israel and by America. Operation Roaring Lion, Operation Epic Fury, almost immediately you had Iran also hitting back. On day 1, right after Israel and US hit out and struck the Iranian leadership hubs, you had Iran hitting back with strikes. Day 2 was dominated by that. In fact, if 500 targets were decimated on day 1, let's take a look at what happened on day 2 when you had Operation True Promise 4. That's what Iran called it. They were hitting back, and how? Targeting not just Israel, but targeting US bases as well across the Middle East. The GCC countries, the Gulf countries were targeted in particular. Many of them didn't see the conflict coming whatsoever. Let's move on to day 3. Why do we keep saying this conflict escalated? Because it had already spread now to the Gulf countries. Iran continued the attacks. US and Israel continued retaliating. And so there were non-stop drone attacks and missile strikes being reported. Iran's strategy was clear. They were targeting US bases. They were also targeting oil infrastructure. And this is where some of the Middle East countries got badly hit. The next day, there was a slight reduction in the tempo of Iran attacks. And this is what US and Israel were counting on. They were hoping on this reduction to continue their strikes and therefore win this war against Iran. If there was a reduction, it didn't make a difference because the war continued. On day 4, this happened, but now in day 7, the war continues. That tells you Iran hasn't completely stopped. On day 5, US also brought in bombers. As Iran continued the attack, US also continued their non-stop strikes, even bringing down an Iranian warship. Since then, a lot has happened. As we continue getting you all of the updates of what's played out in the last 24 hours, one of the questions that's constantly being asked also is what's been done so far by the international bodies, the likes of the United Nations. Now, even as we're tracking all of the updates that come in on this particular conflict, as US, Iran and Israel continue the fight, the United Nations at this point is also facing some tough questions. What's been done by the UN in the face of this conflict, in the face of this war, to actually stop it? How has the United Nations Security Council actually responded? It's essentially caught in a stalemate. These current strikes by US, Israel on Iran have put the UN Charter in the spotlight. And let me explain to you what the UN Charter says. In this case, what's relevant is Article 2, Paragraph 4, the so-called red line of international law. This particular article refers to and forbids unprovoked attacks on another country's territory or political independence. In theory, violators must stop. Leaders could face prosecution for crimes of aggression. I'll highlight that, prosecution for crimes of aggression. This is in theory. In reality, enforcement is rare thanks to Security Council vetoes. And this is where essentially UN is controlled by a handful of countries. History has repeatedly highlighted this. The UN's limits have been shown. In 2022, when Russia claimed self-defense to annex Ukrainian territory, what we know now as the Russia-Ukraine war, the UN General Assembly condemned it, sure, but a Security Council veto blocked any action. There was all of these terms, Putin is a war criminal, nothing was actually done. Let's go back to 2003, when US invaded Iraq over alleged weapons of mass destruction. At that point, the former UN General Secretary Kofi Annan called it illegal, yet the UN did nothing. Let's put out some of those details also on our screens. There were similar gaps that appeared during India's 1971 intervention in Bangladesh, NATO's Kosovo bombing in 1999. I can go on and on. This is a long list where nothing has been done. But we're also highlighting for you that in each of these conflicts, you saw a number of UN meetings taking place. 27 plus UN meets took place. On the Russia-Ukraine war, nothing happened. On Iraq's invasion, 5 UN meets. Again, nothing happened. Because what's also important to highlight here is that funding complicates the matter further. America, the world's largest UN donor, provides 22% of the regular budget and about 26% of peacekeeping funds. Cuts under the Trump administration have tightened the UN's hands even more. And so essentially the UN now is completely toothless. Let's talk about the P5 countries. US defends its strikes. It says it's all self-defense against Iranian nuclear threats and the fact that they're continuing with the nuclear program. And so they've also rejected any ceasefire call, saying this is self-defense. Russia and China are backing Tehran, calling the attacks aggression and blocking sanctions. UK and France offering milder critiques, condemning civilian casualties, but largely and clearly siding with America. Now, the bottom line is this. The Security Council is paralyzed. Civilians are paying the price. And that article that I referred to, it remains a bright line on paper, but often powerless in practice. There's no actual action that's taken by the UN, despite very clearly, in theory, there's a mention of what is to be done. What has the UN done in the last few days? The reason we played that particular soundbite from Melania Trump is because that was from the UN Security Council. And I'll bring in Pranay Upadhyay for more on this. Pranay, disappointing how the UN has responded so far to the crisis at hand. The United Nations has become a toothless body. Is it right to say that?
Absolutely. This is yet another conflict, Akshita, in which United Nations has failed to global expectations to play a significant role for the dispute resolution, for solving a problem. But see, that the United Nations born out of the ashes of the World War II.
Yeah.
We know that how this body was, formed by 51 member states. Yeah. And in fact,
this is what they're supposed to do.
They were supposed to do. At times, on a lighter note, I may see, I would like to make a simile or analogy like an RWA, which does not have any power.
Yeah.
The residents own the property.
Yeah.
They have their own rights.
So you see statements, condemnation, nothing
exactly.
more.
This is the ineffectiveness of United Nations as an institution. And if you see the post-COVID world, we have successively seen that, during the COVID crisis, we have seen how UN has failed. We have seen during the Armenia-Azerbaijan, we have seen in the case of, Russia-Ukraine conflict, and in the case of the recent, United States and Israel-led military strikes against Iran. So, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres raised voice, he has issued a statement, he has urged all parties, but besides that, they do not have, UN as an institution does not have any authority to contain the world powers, because the most powerful authority of United Nations rests with the United Nations Security Council. And see, two of the most important, most militarily powerful state members of the United Nations Security Council holding the veto power, United States and Russian Federation. They both are engaging in a military conflict, and they have their own justifications of that. And who knows, at a time when President Donald Trump, on 7th of January, he signed an executive order, Akshita, to exit from 31 UN bodies.
And to cut funding as well.
To cut funding as well. He does not,
believe in.
Yeah, exactly. And he does not hold United Nations as in a very high regard. And that's why, if you see, he is trying to carve out another institution called Board of Peace, chaired by himself.
Correct.
And chaired by the United States. And he has already garnered support and gathered members, and so maybe, who knows, he's trying to make an alternative system out of it. This adds to the ineffectiveness, and that also brings to the point, Akshita, that this is why India was warning, global the global community, the global order about this situation only. For long we have been asking that the current state of United Nations is not reflecting the global reality. Yeah. The world has changed. The most populous country on the planet, that is India, is not member of the Security Council. How can you justify that?
And it's been a campaign, an ongoing campaign that's resulted in nothing.
Japan, South Africa, the biggest country of the African continent. Even the continents are not represented adequately in a body. How can you expect that body to effectively work?
But explain something to me, Pranay. In the statements that have come in post the strikes and the conflict that's played out, has there been any statement that's come in from the UN chief condemning the strikes, condemning what happened, or even condemning Trump? Any of that?
No, that's why he only issued statement. He said that, United Nations urge that military conflict is not the solution. All parties should exercise restraint. But if it is all about the nuclear program, Akshita, the IAEA, the mandated body, to monitor the nuclear program of all nuclear power state or any nation for that matter. The IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, amid this entire, the phase these last 7 days, he has issued a statement and he said that IAEA does not have any evidence to suggest or to prove that Iran possesses nuclear weapon. However, he used the rider as well, and he said that Iran did not allow us to inspect certain facility and this raised suspicion. So we urge Iran to open up, to exercise transparency and come to table. But besides that, the military action is already on Iran and we know where is it leading to.
Yeah, very true. Thanks very much, Pranay, for joining us. Serious questions that really need to be asked of these international organizations. They're the ones supposed to be monitoring the situation, calling out countries that overstep, that go ahead and overstep the red line that's been drawn. None of that actually happening. And so there's a need for serious introspection on that as well.